Hello, my name's Janet King, and I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the new T-level technical qualification in education and early years, EYE competencies. And this is something that is our Assignment 1, Part 1, Competence Observation Criteria, the additional guidance that provides assessor and student guide information. So the first thing that you'll see when you look at this document is that it's been allocated and divided, if you like. The criteria has been shared across the relevant elements, which the DFE EYE criteria best align. So there is no element 1 here, and as we know with generation 2, we are looking at elements 1 to 7, but the way that the criteria from the DFE in terms of competencies have been arranged, there's nothing that we've fixed to element 1. So we have looked at this in terms of element 2, supporting education, element 3, safeguarding equality and diversity and well-being, element 4, special educational needs and disabilities, SEND, element 5, child development, element 6, working in partnership, and element 7, professional practice. So what is this document all about? Let's take a look. So I'm going to read through this introduction because I think this is an important aspect and gives the real key features of what this document is all about. In a nutshell, it's about supporting the assessor to be able to support the students to gather all of the evidence that they need in both knowledge and skills in order to get that full and relevant status. So we are able to use a range of assessment methods. So that range of assessment methods will become clear as we go through this introduction in terms of what can we do for the knowledge-based outcomes, and what can we do, if anything differently, for the skills-based outcome. So let's just take a moment to read through this introduction. So this assessor and student guide has been developed to support providers with assessing the Department for Education's Early Years Educator criteria. The competencies have been grouped into elements with further exemplification by means of a definition or explanation as appropriate. And we'll take a look at some examples to show that. Narrative observations and comprehensive professional discussions that are time-stamped for audio or clearly referenced on a template will serve as sufficient justification for skills-based criteria. Now, whilst these methods can be applied to any of the criteria, it must be noted that observation is the preferred method and should be prioritised for those criteria identified with the letter F in this document. Skills-based outcomes must be met through direct observation and/or professional discussion by the provider-appointed assessor. Now, here's where things get a little bit different and hopefully offering a little bit more flexibility and agility to you as an assessor and for the student in terms of the types of evidence methods that can be applied to knowledge-based outcomes. A range of assessment methods, including observation, professional discussion, reflective, written accounts, and work products, are suitable for the justification of knowledge-based outcomes identified with the letter K in this document. In the unlikely event that students produce evidence that does not neatly fit into the categories provided for knowledge-based criteria, provided-appointed assessors are encouraged to contact NCFE to discuss the suitability of the assessment method for generation of evidence. So this means that those reflective accounts and those written narratives can be supported by tutor involvement. So whilst tutor involvement is not mandated, they can support with the knowledge-based evidence generation, for example, in the production of authentic, valid, reflective written accounts and work products produced by the students during their classroom studies. Any evidence produced in this way must be supervised by the tutor and submitted to the provider-appointed assessor. So that's really important. So the written evidence isn't something that can be produced outside of supervised classroom, normal classroom activity, but they can take place in there, be stored securely, and before they are then handed over and submitted to the provider-appointed assessor, who will be making that final call on competency. So the provider-appointed assessor, as always, is responsible for signing off all knowledge and skills criteria. NCFE does not mandate tutor involvement, but recommends that knowledge criteria evidence generation can be supported in this way. And this will support the manageability when we think about all of those knowledge criteria that are found in the DFE Early Years Educator criteria. Provider-appointed assessors must be occupationally competent and experienced in making assessment decisions. They may hold an assessor qualification, which is considered as best practice, but not mandated. Provider-appointed assessors must be committed to continuous professional development. So let's just take a look at what this document looks like. At the beginning of the document, as always, you will have the full list of criteria. This is almost like a content or index list of when the students or how the students are meeting those competencies. Where is it being stored? Where could we find it? And that just helps in the collation of materials. You'll notice here that we have some knowledge statements that have been associated with particular elements. In this case here, we're thinking about element 4. It might be something that's taught in element 4 when we're thinking of equality, for example. And that might be the best classroom experience to be able to ask the student to write about or reflect on this particular criteria. However, we also know that the way that tutors arrange the elements and how they teach them, sometimes holistically, sometimes where there are things in an element, in a specification that might overlap a couple of elements, then as tutors you're going to decide where that is the best fit for delivery. Absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're not doing it as part of element 4. What matters is that you are meeting this criteria in a valid, authentic and appropriate way with the students. So that will take you all the way through the criteria. And as I say, you may or may not agree with the elements that have been put in there, but that really is at your discretion and the way that you've arranged your teaching and learning to cover the different elements. So something to discuss in terms of where that best fit might be for you. So I'm going to quickly scroll down this document now. This is where I would normally say, mind your eyes, because what you can see is that there's a big long list, and we know that. So how is it being created and developed in order to support you as assessors and tutors to be able to support your students in the best possible way? So the first thing I'm going to just show you quickly are the templates. So on here, you've got the observation planning form. Nothing new there. So your students are working with you as assessors to plan for their observations, which criteria are going to be planned for. And obviously, whatever you see on that day, some criteria may not be seen that you've planned for, and you carry that forward. And you're looking holistically, so some criteria that you didn't plan for may also be something that you do manage to see on here. You've then got an observation recording form, so you're recording what you did actually see on there. You've got a professional discussion form, and you will then find that you've got a reflective account or written narrative form, and that's something that wasn't included when we were thinking about the different types of evidence in Generation 1, but is now something that could be used for Generation 2 for the knowledge-based criteria. And as always, you have the feedback. So feedback to the student and future planning as to what you might look for next is going to be your final template. And then here's an example of that element by element assessment. So going to just take a look at a knowledge, and we're going to take a look at a skill. So anything beginning with a K refers to the EYE criteria from the Department for Education that is knowledge-based, so what the student needs to know about. And the assessment methods for anything beginning with a K can include observation, professional discussion, reflective written accounts and work products, or a combination of methods as appropriate to justify the assessment decisions that the assessor is making. And what this document will do is give you a little example of perhaps what that means in terms of how might I explain that to my students. So it's given a little bit of information there, and it's also giving you space to be able to put in there what type of evidence, and then you can start to also fill in the contents list at the beginning as well. So it goes all the way through in this way, but we've also looked for opportunities where there may be some holistic overlap. So here, for example, if we just look at this, it's saying CK1.21. So let's have a look. There must be an overlap here. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of K121 just to illustrate this point. So we're looking at the early years foundation stage, the EYFS, and that it sets out the early education curriculum requirements from birth to age 5, and then it lists what those 7 areas are, starting with the prime and going on to the specific. And here we're saying the content in 1.22, the content of the curriculum is planned for all children. The carefully planned and sequenced curriculum recognises that some forms of knowledge are important, useful and interesting. These forms of knowledge help prepare children for future learning and are not learned or discovered without explicit teaching. So we're looking at the structured aspects of what might be in a in an early years foundation stage in the curriculum, in an early years curriculum. And it says here back in 1.21 with planning, with careful planning, K 1.21 and 1.22 can be met through evidence. With careful planning and with examples from students' practice, S130 can be met here. So think about this, how this document could be used to help you to triangulate some of this evidence. So if you're observing S130 or you're having a professional discussion following S130, maybe there's opportunities to bring in or to ask for some reflective accounts on K121 and K122. For example. So again, it's at your discretion. You could look at all criteria in isolation, but this document is trying to pinpoint where there may, all students are going to give you different aspects, I know that, but it gives you the opportunity to see where there may be some holistic opportunities with careful planning, and those opportunities can be taken advantage of. Now, I want to try and find an S. Here we are. So, assessment methods must, for the skills, assessment methods must include observation and professional discussion and may only be complemented by alternative methods such as reflective or written accounts and work products, or a combination of methods as appropriate to justify assessment decisions. So this time you have got to include observation and professional discussion. And if you use any other type of method, it can only be to complement this. It can only be in support of what you've seen or what you've discussed. So this again gives you links and will always try and point you back to direct observation, but it will also give reference to professional discussion as well, and again will highlight opportunities for those direct holistic opportunities here. And this, remember, choose, plan and sequence what all children need to learn. So when we looked at 1.21 and 1.22, then we are thinking about the links that might be something that you see here, or you plan to observe, or you discuss following an observation, and look for the opportunities here to be able to bring in 1.21 and potentially 1.22 as well. So that's how this document works, and it goes all the way through in that way. So please do have a good look through. This is something that you will find on our qualification website now, and I hope you find it useful. And if you have any questions, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you for your patience while this document has gone through several quality checks to make it the best it can possibly be to support you. Thank you.